Now that you've seen what level 1 ethics is all about, you're going to be introduced to level 2 ethics. Now here, we're going to see that level 2 ethics deals with more complex situations. What do you do when you have an ethical dilemma or when you have a values conflict? You're going to be provided with an original tool to deal with these ethical dilemmas and these values conflicts. Finally, I want you to pay particular attention to the practical benefits of ethical leadership.
Level 2 ethics is a little more complicated. This is what I talked about when there's that value conflict, right? So look in the underlined section there. This is about when doing the right thing requires doing something else wrong or leaving another right thing undone. How do you decide what to do when two important values conflict? Now here's what's interesting. At level 2 of our two-tiered ethics, we're not so concerned about the choice you make, but why you made the choice that you did, why you made the decision, what was the process that you made the decision with. Because again, this is a choice between right and right or wrong and wrong. There's two values here that are important. It's not simply don't steal, don't embarrass the government, don't lie, you know, that kind of a thing. So let me give you an example of something I faced in my first position with the state here. We had a rule at this facility that I worked at. I was a trainer. And people were required to take an hour and a half of workplace harassment, right? It had to be, in fact, that time was very important to this facility. And that was based on DHRM rule and, you know, recommended business practice, things like that. I had the superintendent of this facility come to me and say, Dan, I can't make it to workplace harassment training. I need you to just give me a 2-minute overview and then give me credit. Now let me tell you, the training department was not necessarily treated very well under this regime. We had sort of lost funding and power, and they were always looking to cut positions and things like that. So I felt an obligation to my training unit to put us in good standing with this power broker, with the leader of this facility. And yet she was asking me to compromise the rule, to, in fact, a rule that was in place for very important reasons, and to give her this quick 2-minute training. This was an ethical dilemma for me. Now here's what's interesting. In ethics training, in ethics classes, in ethical discussions that are public, everyone is always just a superhero. They always say, well, I'd stand up to her and say, go to hell, and I would never compromise my values, and blah, blah, blah. You got to take the full class, and, you know, that kind of a thing. That's not always the best choice in real life, okay? And in fact, I gave her the training. I told her I, you know, didn't feel entirely comfortable, but if she wanted to go through with it, I would give her the training, because I felt the value to me at that time was that this was her rule, and that I would thought it was the value that mattered more to me was helping my training unit have credibility and viability with her, because she could be vindictive, and if I had said nope, I refused to do it, she would have gotten credit somehow, some way, anyway, and I would have really damaged the training unit. So these are the kind of ethical dilemmas that we're talking about here. Okay, so we want to give you a tool for making ethical decisions. And that tool is an acronym we're calling Perms. And this is a process for making ethical decisions, okay? And that's just an example of a perm, so you can remember this, because that's the best example of a perm I could find. Plus, Mike Brady seems like a pretty ethical dude, right? He was a pretty good dad. So how do we make a decision when it's, you know, well, this is important, but this is important as well? Here's what PERM stands for. Okay, the first P is policy. What's the policy, rule, or law involved? Because if your decision requires you to violate policy, rule, or law, you better think long and hard about doing it. I'm not encouraging policy breaking or rule breaking here or law breaking, but I'm saying there are times, for example, if I saw a toddler in the street, I would jaywalk without thinking about it to get that toddler out of the street, right? Now, I don't consider myself a massive lawbreaker, but in that case, there are times when we violate our own policy, like I did with that workplace harassment training and that superintendent. The E in Perms stands for exception. You ask yourself, if I make this choice, am I making an exception for myself? And what I mean by that is, if someone were to come to you with this dilemma and ask you what to do, would you tell them the opposite of what actual decision you've made? So if someone had come to me and said, Dan, what should I do about this workplace harassment training? If I said, you got to stand up, well, then if I actually give her the training, I'm making an exception for myself, okay? Now, on the more practical side, here is R, which stands for result. You need to think very clearly about what the result will be for you making this decision, okay? And that's what I really thought about. What would happen if I said, no, superintendent, I'm not going to give you this training, okay? The result, I suspect, would have been very bad for me, but more importantly for the training unit, okay? The M stands for motive, and this requires you to be self-reflective. You and I are really good at convincing ourselves that our motives are pure. But if I make this decision, am I comfortable with what my actual motives are? For example, if with this superintendent my motive had really just been to avoid confrontation because I'm conflict averse, I don't think that's a good enough motive, okay? But we need to check that kind of a thing. And then finally, service, as in the public service. Does this action promote the public service? Does it represent the government, the agency well, right? You know, I want to add one more S here so we can make it Perms, you know. And here's just some good advice. Add another S on there, and it would be seek out someone you trust. If you're having an ethical conflict, seek out someone you know who's got integrity and ask them what they think, or ask a number of people who you know have integrity and ask them what they think about a situation, okay? Now I want to show you the process of thinking and how we implement Perms into decision making. So the first thing you want to think about is, I'm facing an ethical dilemma. In fact, let me give you one more dilemma that might be common. Let's say you're a hiring manager, and you put a deadline on a position that is really hard to fill for your agency. You guys struggle to fill it. And you notice that the deadline has ended, and yet 3 applications came in after the deadline, and they are easily the 3 best candidates. As you look over the resumes and applications, they are easily the 3 most competent people. In fact, maybe the only 3 that are really qualified for interviews, and yet it's after the deadline. I think you have a dilemma there, okay? Now, is this at the public level, the organizational level, or personal level, or a number of them, okay? Only you can figure that out. The next one is, what values are conflicting here? Well, one is you value following rules, right? And there's a deadline, and you want to be fair. These people got it in on time, and the 3 really qualified people didn't, and we want to be just, and we want to be fair, but we also value our division, our agency, our team, and we know that it's a struggle to fill these positions, and here you've got 3 really qualified people, okay? Now, the next thing is you make a decision, and you take it through the Perms process. So this is important to note. Perms, what I just went through, policy, exception, result, motive, and service, and seeking out someone you trust, that comes after you've made a decision. Not taken action, but after you've made a decision. Okay, and so I say, all right, with the superintendent, I said, okay, I'm going to give her the training. Then I say, okay, am I violating a policy? The answer was yes. I was violating a rule she had created, right? Am I making an exception for myself? I didn't think so. What would the result be? Well, I think there would be no fallout from it, and I think I probably put the training unit in a better position, a more viable position, a position to do our jobs better. My motive was that, to help the training unit, and I didn't think I was compromising the public service. This was a very private conflict, maybe at the personal and organizational level. I didn't seek out anybody I trusted. I did not follow that. So here is the actual process you go through. Does this make sense? So you make that decision, and then you take it through Perms. But you think about the values, because remember, ethical leaders are aware of the values conflicts. Think about, is this going to be a public embarrassment? Is this at the organizational level, or is it simply my own personal values that are being compromised? Okay? So I'm not going to ask a poll question here, but you think about it for yourself. How many of you would, now here's the thing. With ethical dilemmas, we have a lot of people say, well, I would do this, and they come up with some creative new solution. That's great, but a lot of times that's not an option. Maybe you couldn't, with this hiring manager example I gave you, maybe you couldn't reopen the position. Or maybe if you did reopen it, these 3 people would go get other jobs that were really qualified. So would you just let them pass because they were only a day late or something? Or would you say, nope, fairness matters more to me. I'm not going to let these 3 people, even though they'd be great, even though maybe other people would tell me to let them slide, I'm going to only interview the people that made it in on the deadline because we have a deadline in place and I want to follow the rules. Think about it, okay? Think about what you would do. These answers are always easier in the hypothetical. In real life, they become a lot more complex as we deal with the politics of an organization and are faced with these actual difficult decisions. But before we close here, I just want to draw your attention to the benefits of 2-tiered ethics. This is leaders who are aware of both levels, who are ethically savvy, who are ethically conscious, right? Here are the benefits, right? Attention to ethics improves all of society. I think that's a pretty basic statement. I think we can all agree to that. More focus on ethics and ethical behavior is a benefit to all of us. Organizations that have ethical climates foster trust, and we know that trust leads to higher job satisfaction, better performance, better leadership. Ethical organizations can focus more on achieving the mission and vision of their organization as opposed to dealing with conflicts all the time, especially at that level 1 tier, where we're just dealing with messes because people feel like they can get away with things or because we've let them get away with unethical behavior. Ethical organizations attract the right kind of employees, right? Trustworthy, ethical employees want to work in ethical environments, right? So let's get a reputation for the state of Utah being a highly ethical environment to work at. Ethical managers and employees are less distracted by ethical challenges and are more confident in doing their jobs effectively, especially at the level 1 level, but also at level 2. If they feel like they've got a good process, the one that we've just given you that I think is really useful, they're more confident in making those choices and decisions with ethical dilemmas, okay? We've seen this with the data we showed at the beginning of the webinar. Organizations with ethical climates are better to work at and promote better job satisfaction. And really important for us with that, promoting the public service here, ethical organizations have the right image with the public, especially this is critical for government agencies, and they can be more effective because of it. And then finally, at a personal level, ethical leaders have more credibility with staff, and without credibility, you cannot lead, okay? You cannot lead without that credibility. And if you're seen as ethical, like that matters to you, well then you've got more credibility with your staff. So again, remember these 2 levels of ethics. They bleed over into one another. There's some blurring there, of course, but become ethically conscious. Okay, I cannot stress enough how important this is for government leaders to be seen as ethical.